In previous lessons, we've covered some of the action modes you can select in Tricentis Tosca. In this lesson, we'll continue with the action mode buffer. The goal is for you to be able to use this action mode properly. We'll first look at why it's necessary to use the action mode buffer and what it does. We'll then, as usual, show you where to select it and how. An important part of testing is making sure to save and reuse values that the system under test has provided you. This makes the testing and verification as flexible and resilient as possible. For example, ordering a product in the demo webshop will generate an order number. For subsequent test steps, it's then important to save both the order number as well as the price of the product. Instead of using hard-coded data, you can save the generated values by using a buffer. This will allow you to use those saved values generated by the system in any subsequent steps. Tosca uses the action mode buffer to save any type of value generated during the execution of the test case. It can either be static or a dynamic value. This value will be temporarily saved in Tosca and can be used later on in the same test case. As with all action modes, also the action mode buffer can be selected within the test case section in the column Action Mode. Let's look at an example for the action mode buffer in Tosca. Let's say you want to store the price of the blue jeans you've purchased for verification later on. In order to do that, you have to find the control which has the property you want to save. In this case, it's the container price blue jeans' inner text. Most objects have default properties and behavior. For example, Tosca knows that text boxes have text, and it treats them accordingly. Not all objects will have default properties. This applies, for example, to divs or any other type of container. Because this is a container, you have to explicitly tell Tosca to use the inner text of the control for buffering. You can then choose a name for the buffer. This is a variable name behind which you can store the value to recall later on. It's best practice to give recognizable names to the buffers. However, it is essential that when reusing it later on, you type the name exactly as you have defined in the buffer, with the exact syntax and capitalization. Here, you can use the name price blue jeans with capital P, B, and J, and no spaces. You can then set the action mode to buffer. If you run the test step in the scratchbook, you will get a message saying that the buffer was stored. It's important to remember that every time you run that test step, the value will be overwritten by the new value. So, if it's changing in the application, the buffer will also change. To recall a buffer value, you can use the syntax open curly bracket, B, open square bracket, buffer name, close square bracket, close curly bracket. In this example, you will have open curly bracket, B, open square bracket, price blue jeans, close square bracket, close curly bracket. Thanks to this expression, you can now call up a buffer value either to verify or to input it somewhere else in the system under test. To see the buffers directly in the workspace view, navigate to the Tools section on the ribbon. Here you can find the Buffer Viewer. In this window, you can see all the buffers stored in Tosca. On the left is the buffer name, and on the right is the buffer value. Not only that, but you can create a new buffer and edit existing ones by clicking on them as well. You can also delete a buffer you no longer want by pressing the delete button on your keyboard. You can also do the same by clicking on Project, Settings, Engine. Here you can also see a list of the buffers created. You can create a new one and also delete them. Please note that buffers should only be created and used within the same test case to ensure that the same value is used. Additionally, buffers are only saved locally, so you cannot expect different users to pass buffered values to each other across multiple runs. To share values across tests and testers, Tosca uses the Tricentis Test Data Service. You can find out more information about Test Data Service in the course Test Design Specialist Level 2. And this concludes this lesson. You are now able to use the ActionMode buffer properly. Test your knowledge with this exercise.